Hi, Shir. Hi, Geshema.
Hi, Leora.
Hi, Leora. Yeshima, hi, everyone. We'll start in 2 minutes.
2 minutes? 2 minutes more? Right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, Geshema, for teaching us. I want to just one thing about the teachings from now on. From next week, we will need to put in a password when we enter into Zoom. It's for all the Dharma friends classes will be like this. So we'll send instructions in the group also, and we will post it, I guess, also in the in any way, and you can reach me, of course, if there is any issue. Other than that, I pasted here the link if you want to support the activity of the Dharma Friends of Israel and their teacher. That's it. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And Yeshua. Thank you.
It's 7 now. Should I start now?
Yeah.
Start? Okay, great. Well, as usual, we start with some meditation. At the very beginning, of course, some breathing meditation. So, as usual, let's start with that. And then, well, you know the drill, then setting the motivation and so forth. Now visualize in the space in front of you sits the Buddha. As an inspiration to us that we strive to attain the same qualities the Buddha attained. And in front of him are great masters of the past who first studied the Buddha's teachings and then put them into practice themselves, like Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Buddhapalita, Chandakirti. And then surrounding these great beings and yourself are all sentient beings. quietly sitting there, experiencing all the different types of sufferings. And now think, I have this rare opportunity to learn about Buddhist psychology, especially this very precious text by Chandakirti. And I have the opportunity to integrate it into my own life. And so I'll do this in order for it to become one of the countless causes for my own enlightenment. That I strive to attain for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then with this motivation from the depth of our heart, let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. The four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay, great. Well, it's the eve of Yom Kippur, right? What's it called? Erev Yom Kippur, am I right? Is today Erev Yom Kippur? Okay, I did a little bit of reading on Yom Kippur just to understand it better.
Geshe, we can't hear you. Can you please closer the mic?
Okay, sure. Can you hear me now?
I can hear.
Can you hear me okay now?
Little bit.
No, it's muted.
It's muted.
No,
I
it's
can
not
hear.
muted.
I can hear.
You can
You
hear?
sound muted.
Okay, can
I
you hear
can
me
hear.
now? Yeah? All right. I'll speak up. If you can't hear me, please say so.
No.
Not very loud. Okay, I can see Kendall says it's not very loud. Okay, great. I'll speak up a little bit. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, it's always good that you tell me. Also, if I'm too fast, please let me know. Okay, great. Well, I looked up Yom Kippur, and well, I've heard many times, of course, is the Day of Atonement, but there are some things that you don't do: no eating, no drinking. Beautiful. Not anointing yourself. It reminds me a little bit of the 10 bodhisattva commitments, or what's it called, the Mahayana precepts. Anyway, so, and it also talks about charity, so that's beautiful, not harming anyone. Great. So that takes us from charity to the next chapter, which, well, we'll start soon. But also, of course, making sure that you're not in trouble, that you're in good relations with other people. So I was thinking today, especially since we're trying to put into practice this entire text, it's not just about understanding it. Hopefully I'll be able to discuss it in a way with you that there's a better understanding of the verses. And I'd like to today just have a brief review of what we've done. Won't take long, but just to point out some of the main parts. But of course, I was also thinking the thread that goes through this entire text, this guiding light, if you like, is compassion, is great compassion. And so asking you to practice this on a daily basis, your practices should always be together with great compassion, always be with this care for other sentient beings. And however hard that is, well, to just give it a try. And sometimes you fake it. You just fake it. You just think to yourself, may all sentient beings be free from suffering, though you don't feel it that way, but still it does move you to a certain degree. So of course, if you can totally feel it, that'd be perfect. But if you can't, then that's also all right. And I was thinking about that. And of course, what's the greatest obstacles to doing that is if you don't like someone, if you got trouble with someone, if you don't get along with someone. So then the Day of Atonement is great if you actually practice that, because, well, what I've read, I mean, I didn't read anything but Wikipedia, so I could be totally wrong about it. But what I read was that you repent what you've done in relationship to God, but also in relationship to other people. And that's what I'm interested in, your relationship with other people. So to have regret, you have to have regret, apparently, what you've done wrong, at least. And then, of course, make things up. So that's a beautiful opportunity. You have like a whole day doing that. I mean, the Buddhists don't have a Day of Atonement. So, wow, you can practice that and go back to Chandakirti's text. I think that's really beautiful. And it makes it easier, of course, to generate compassion for sentient beings if you can actually practice that. Am I still loud enough? Okay, great. Anyway, so let's do this. Let's go quickly over the beginning just to make sure you don't forget. Not that much, like I said, I'll do it really quickly. We started off with great compassion. We started off with the mind that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. And if you take it further, the wish, may I be able to free sentient beings from suffering. And we start off with the explanation of the four great beings in Buddhism. Two with relation to the Mahayana, two in relation to the Hinayana. Now, I know these words are not used usually, but it takes me too long to always think about the correct term. So you know what I mean. Hinayana, Mahayana, or Theravada, Mahayana. Anyway, two Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, and then Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with regard to the Mahayana. And it's said that they're dependent on each other, the way this explained before, but it all comes down to the Bodhisattvas. So you can't have Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, those aiming mainly to become self-liberated, unless you have Buddhas. But you can't have Buddhas without Bodhisattvas. But you can't have Bodhisattvas without these three great qualities, such as compassion, of course, bodhicitta, and understanding of emptiness. Okay, so that's what the first verse talks about. The second verse then says that, in particular, great compassion, that is the cause of all the other qualities, of the other two qualities. Here, understanding of emptiness, and it's a special type of emptiness, a special understanding here that is influenced by great compassion. And again, you couldn't have bodhicitta without great compassion. So great compassion is the root. That's what's demonstrated in verse 2. But at the same time, the way it demonstrates that to us is saying it's so important in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. So great compassion is the life of the path. All right. And then it goes into what kinds of compassion there are. There are 3 types. Compassion that merely focuses on sentient beings, the one that focuses on sentient beings, but with another mind also understands the impermanence, for instance, of sentient beings, and then the one that is again focusing on sentient beings, compassion, which is conjoined, which rises at the same time as there's an understanding of the emptiness of sentient beings. Right? So you have these 3 types of compassion, of great compassion. Now, the verse number 3 describes just compassion, good old compassion without understanding emptiness or understanding impermanence of sentient beings. And it describes just that simple, great compassion. But how does it describe it? It first talks about how to develop compassion. It shows the method. So with the first 2 lines, it talks about how sentient beings wander in cyclic existence in samsara, how they're totally trapped with no control. So the causes, it gives basically the causes, and then the last 2 lines, how they wander in samsara, how that happens and how they experience suffering. Then in verse 4, or the first 2 lines of verse 4, it talks of the 2 other types of compassion, the compassion of someone in the continuum of someone who realizes the impermanence of sentient beings, and the compassion, the great compassion in the continuum of someone who realizes the emptiness of sentient beings. All right. So it's the first 2 lines of verse 4. And then the text goes on to say, then the actual body of the text starts, and it says, well, we've talked about the beginning in those verses when you start off to practice great compassion, bodhicitta, understanding of emptiness. But then you reach this point where we describe as the time when you become an arya, when you become an arya bodhisattva. So you join this club of the 4 great aryas. So which arya club do you join? The ones of the arya bodhisattvas. And you develop these incredible qualities. And again, understanding those qualities, you understand better how you can get there. Okay, so first, of course, bodhisattvas on that level, they're greatly influenced by their compassion. All right. And then at the same time, they do a lot of prayers. They pray a lot. They dedicate all their virtue to enlightenment, and they have great joy. Great compassion makes sense. Joy. Well, what is it with joy? I'm not talking about the joy of getting back at your neighbor. It may give you like a moment of, finally, I was able to get back at him. But no, it's a joy that comes out of a deep sense of satisfaction, contentment, and calmness. So there's something about joy in Buddhism. You find that in other practices. For instance, an extended version of joy is bliss. It's a state of mind where you experience incredible well-being. And that makes the mind subtler, which then you use to meditate on. So this is the theme. Joy is a huge theme. It's important to have a certain degree of contentment, happiness, and calm. Very important for Buddhist practice. So you get it through Buddhist practice, but also once you have it, it serves again as a basis for other practices. All right. So that's important. Just to give you a sense, great joys. Once you reach that first ground, that level where you realize the ultimate nature of all phenomena directly, great joys is important. But then there's also intense dedication. Dedication, it's a type of prayer. It's a type of prayer where you dedicate whatever virtue you've accumulated, you dedicate it towards enlightenment. So dedicated towards a certain goal. But not every prayer is a dedication prayer. Actually, what is a prayer? Lama Tsongkhapa describes a prayer in a text that's called the Golden Rosary. And in there he gives a quote from the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, from Maitreya's text, Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, or what's it called? The ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. And in there he says that any mind that is connected with an aspiration, and here aspiration, a positive type of aspiration, is a prayer. So when you wish for, you strive for something. So basically, bodhicitta is a prayer. Bodhicitta is a prayer. So prayer in the English language means something slightly different. But the Tibetans use it the same way on the daily basis that we use it in English, for instance, the word prayer. I have to cite a prayer. I will pray for it. Praying is not the words. Praying is not the verbal expression itself. It's the mental state. So you wish for something. And that is just the power of the mind, that if you wish for something, it sets your mind in a certain direction. And then if the wish continues on, you will automatically accumulate the causes and conditions to fulfill that wish. That's the power of the mind. The power of the mind is so incredible that, of course, if you want to achieve something, you can only do so if you have the wish to do so. And that is called prayer. And that's considered to be really important. And especially once you understand reality as it actually is, those pure prayers will just come forth automatically, because you see how important it is to strive towards these goals, and that this is actually striving towards your actual nature. All right. Anyway, that's what it says in verse 4 and 5. It's 4 is the last 2 lines of verse 4, the first 2 lines of verse 5. I just wanted to say that about the prayer. So anyway, we can move on. Next part is the qualities. Next, what's explained are the qualities of someone who's reached the first ground. Very briefly, there are qualities that beautify our own continuum, our own mental continuum. What are these qualities? Well, you receive now the name of being an arya bodhisattva. Okay, it's just a name, but anyway, it's kind of an honor to be called that. Then you're born in the lineage. You're now part of this arya bodhisattva family, if you like. You eliminated the 3 fetters. You experienced great joy, as already described. You're able to move thousands of worlds. You're able to move other sentient beings in a great way. You move on. You're not satisfied with your qualities, but you continue for the welfare of other sentient beings to move on. You can no longer be reborn in states that are unfortunate, that are full of suffering. You can no longer go back to being an ordinary person. And in summary, you're like an arya in the Theravada or in the Hinayana tradition, who's on the 8th level, counting from the top down. So the 8th level is actually the first once you enter the arya path in the Hinayana level. So you're now similar to that, except of course you have got bodhicitta. You're aiming for a goal that is even harder to reach, which is enlightenment, harder to reach than liberation, but of course doing so for the sake of all sentient beings. All right, so these are all the qualities you attain there, plus there are qualities where you outshine those who are on the path to self-liberation. Okay, I talked about that. So first, in terms of your prayer, in terms of your aspiration, it's full enlightenment, it's bodhicitta. And of course, once you reach the 7th level, the 7th ground, then also you surpass those striving towards self-liberation. Until the 6th level, there's no difference. You realize emptiness directly. Those striving towards self-liberation realize emptiness directly. There's no difference. But once you reach the 7th level, you're able to enter into an absorption and come right out of it again. An absorption into emptiness, you go into it and come right out of it. So this mental ability you can only achieve once you reach the 7th ground. And no Hinayana practitioner is able to do that. They don't have that flexibility of mind, which is achieved through bodhicitta. Okay, so it just gives us a sense of what you can do with your mind, and we get to that once we get to the 7th chapter. But then another quality that is special, and that's what we've been talking about, is generosity, is the ability to give, the selfless giving that bodhisattvas engage in. So they've already engaged in that before, of course, on the levels before. Now you've reached the arya level, if you think of yourself actually reaching that level. So before that, already you have, of course, you're very generous, you're very giving. However, there's always something that holds you back a little bit, a sense of stinginess or a sense of attachment to the things you're giving away, but that's gone on that level. All right. So that's why it says in verse 9, it talks about once you reach that level, you can easily give away your body, can even give your organs, your body, can easily give it away. We could give away our body now. I'm sure some of us could give maybe their kidneys to a loved one, etc. But there's always this kind of slight discomfort, like, should I really do it? You really have to consider it. Whereas a person on that level, they freely give away their organs, of course, in combination with wisdom. So you don't easily give away something so precious as your own body, but you have that ability if it's necessary. And that is a sign, so if you come across someone who can easily give away his or her body, that is a sign that on the basis of that, you can at least infer their qualities. Now, that's an important part of Buddhist practice. I mean, we cannot see into another person's mind unless we develop this ability through meditation. There's a certain perceptiveness that you can develop, understanding another person's mind that can be developed. And even nowadays, even as an ordinary person, of course, there are people who are very perceptive. They can pick up on other people's moods, on other people's states of mind quite easily, and others have a harder time to do that. But in general, if someone has greater qualities than ourselves, it's really hard to tell. And of course, we need to know because, it's helpful to know because these other people can serve as a teacher to us. So teacher means not just being able to explain something, but teacher means someone who lives those teachings. So teacher as in like Lama, spiritual teacher, not just someone discussing things about the Dharma. So like when you think of a Lama, those are these great beings, especially Arya Lamas, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we'll come across this again. They're so important because they can inspire us in the way in which no one else can inspire us. So they live the Dharma, and based on that, we can really learn it, see how this is something you actually have to live. And so it's based on their on their behavior when it comes to generosity that we can infer some of these qualities, at least to a certain degree. So this is what it says in verse 9. And then in verse 10 and 11, the text talks about, well, but we're not there yet. We're still ordinary people. And as ordinary people, we need to have a certain degree of well-being, of happiness. So that doesn't come just from great compassion, etc. Well, let's face it. We're just ordinary people trying to live our lives, going through stress, going through, the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and so forth. And we need a basic, resources that gives us a certain degree of well-being. Okay, so generosity is key for that, because without generosity, we can't reach that. And of course, all these resources, they come from giving, and understanding that we should definitely try our best to develop this habit of being generous. And being generous doesn't mean you give everything away. It's kind of a basic quality. I sometimes come across people, they just have this habit of being generous. It's really amazing how in every situation, it's not like they give huge amounts. I mean, they probably can't do that if they have family, if they don't have a huge salary, they can't do that. But they're always, happy to give a little bit more than the other person, or always happy to chip in and all that. So this is a quality, I think, this habit of just wanting to give. And give means not just material things. I mean, maybe offer something to someone when they come to your house, make them a cup of tea, give them your time, give them your energy. All this is part of giving. So there's some people who have this natural, they can always give. If they see a bird that's hungry, they feed the bird. If they see some dogs, so when it makes sense, of course, you can't teach all this, feed all the stray dogs and the stray cats, etc. But when it makes sense, when it doesn't harm anyone else, well, then this generous kind of attitude. And everyone can kind of grow familiar with that. It's one of the easiest practices, in fact. So therefore, it's also explained in the very beginning, and it's important for Buddhist practice. And if you practice this, as it says in verse 11, well, if you practice this even without all this great compassion and this love, etc., it will still work, because it's just a law of nature. It's a natural law, so it will still work. But if you can manage it to generate a very positive motivation, well, then definitely you can make this simple practice highly effective. And then he goes on to say the generosity of the bodhisattva. So Bada asked this question, where she said, I mentioned that this has 4 parts, but then I didn't explain these 4 parts. And I listened again to the little clip that she sent me, or Shir sent to me through Vada, or Vada sent to me via Shir. So there's this little clip, and I realized I didn't say it clearly enough for this to become clear what I meant. I didn't mean to say that the unique benefits, so this explaining generosity of the bodhisattva has 4 parts, and of those, the first part is the unique benefits of the bodhisattva generosity. Okay, so when it says the unique benefits of the bodhisattva generosity, that's the first part. And then the second part is showing how the discourse on generosity is primary, is one of the main practices for both practitioners who aim for enlightenment and those who aim for self-liberation. And then the third part is what kinds of joys are found when the bodhisattva engages in generosity. And then the third part is the kind of joy. The fourth part is whether there's suffering or not when the bodhisattva gives away his body. All right, so these are the 4 parts. It's not saying that the benefits of the bodhisattva's generosity has 4 parts. Okay, you find this in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. So there are certain verses that are part of all these outlines, all these headings of these outlines. So the unique benefits of the bodhisattva's generosities is described in verse 13, the first 2 lines of verse 13. Then showing how the discourse on generosity is important for both practitioners is 13 verses 3 and 4, and so forth. So we basically went through them last time. What is the unique benefit of the bodhisattva's generosity? Attain incredible joy. All right, so for someone who pledges to help sentient beings, who works for the benefit of sentient beings, well, without much delay, so even without gaining those resources that we've talked about, there's just this incredible joy being able to give. All right, so because, well, last time I asked you, think about why there could be that much joy, and maybe you've spent some time doing that, but it's basically because you're so used to now, your whole life is about all other sentient beings, that being able to directly do something for them, that is, give them something, just gives you that much joy, because that's all you really want. That's your main kind of aim in life. And then he goes on to say how this generosity, well, that this generosity is important for both practitioners. So it says then here in those 2 lines of verse 13, well, for both, whether you have this great compassion or not, this is so important. This practice is so important as part of spiritual practice. So it doesn't explain it any further, but in the commentaries, it does. You can read Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on here. Well, of course, as I said already earlier on, it's important to, well, attain enlightenment, but of course also it's liberation, to just attain liberation, because stinginess is the opposite of generosity. If we didn't have stinginess, we'd be generous naturally. So what holds us back is this inability to give, this attachment to the objects we give, this inability, even if it doesn't belong to us, not even the wish to give to the other person. So there's a aversion part of it. We may not like the other person, so we don't want to give something to them. And there's also stinginess involved. And now both this aversion towards others, as well as this attachment towards the things that are to be given, well, they're an obstacle to attaining liberation or enlightenment, which is why we need to make an effort to get rid of them. And actually generosity, what's so beautiful, of course, it mainly benefits ourselves. All these practices mainly benefit ourselves. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama talks about this on many occasions. He says, great compassion mainly benefits us. Compassion mainly benefits us. Others may not even know we have compassion. And the moment you generate compassion, you feel good. The moment you generate it, unless of course you've got other worries and they just take over. But if that's not the case, it just calms the mind. It makes us feel good. And then in combination with that, if you have generosity, well, again, this feels good to give to others, and it benefits yourself greatly. But of course, it also benefits others because they receive whatever is being given. So it's very practical in terms of actually being able to benefit the other person. Just compassion, unless you act on it, doesn't benefit another person. But generosity, well, of course, here generosity that you also act upon, that definitely benefits sentient beings no matter what you do. So, of course, you can't really separate them, because even if you act out of compassion, to a certain degree, you are practicing generosity, even if it's just being generous with your smile. Okay. Anyway, going on to the text continues, then verse 14 talks about the third kind of quality, or the third kind of aspect of explaining the generosity of bodhisattvas, which is the kinds of joys that are found when the bodhisattvas engage in giving. So it's not just giving, it's just hearing the word, give me. That brings so much joy. So that's such an interesting thing, because sometimes if we hear someone beg, someone comes to and knocks on our door, we're like, oh no. I mean, I'm pretty sure we all know this, like feeling annoyed when someone asks us once again to give them something. Maybe the neighbor asking once again to borrow an egg, and they never return it. And when you come over to borrow an egg, they're always out when you go over. So I mean, those things, like when we feel annoyed to give, or whatever is the situation when there's a beggar, or I'm pretty sure we've all known this kind of feeling of annoyance. Oh no, ask again. But that's not. Here's like, oh, how kind of them to ask me to give. Okay. So I hope that gives you gives us a sense, like, what's the attitude of those bodhisattvas? I mean, totally strange to us, I guess. Strange to us. It's not something we come across often, and we may even think that person is a total friar if they feel that way. But of course, it's important to understand this is a mental attitude. At the outside, they can be stern and hard, and they don't allow anyone to use them. No, why not? Well, because it's not good for the other person. So let's stop the other person for their own good. And they can be very strict, and they can be even scary. But if they're motivated by love and compassion, well, then their actions of sternness and of toughness is for the welfare of all sentient beings. So please don't mix those up. It's just a mental attitude. Everything we're talking about is mental. How it expresses itself in our actions, well, that just depends. But just to give you a sense, just asking to give, they're like, yeah, okay, it's there for others. Now, again, this is a good explanation that gives us a sense of what we need to do, what we're working towards. If we really want to experience happiness, the one thing that's the driving force of everything we do, well, that's the way to do this. Okay. And we're a long way from experiencing that type of happiness. But, well, it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of continuing doing what we're doing. And of course, I keep asking you to bring this into your daily life. Okay, and now with tomorrow Yom Kippur, as I already mentioned, great opportunity. As part of Yom Kippur, you practice charity. And even if you don't practice it in the sense that you physically give something, to just visualize it. Also, that is very, very powerful. To visualize giving yourself all your possessions, give away your body, give away all your virtues, give away the most precious things. What are most precious to you? Your life, well, your family, your possessions, as well as the virtue, all the positive potential you've accumulated. So you give those away to others. Of course, you don't actually do that, but you just train your mind, in that openness, in that willingness to just give to others. And that way you become more familiar with that. All right. And see how you feel. If there's a sense of relieving yourself of this attachment, because you can't be attached to it and at the same time freely give. And also to, of course, make it a habit. So I keep stressing that. I keep stressing this. Is this a terrible time? It's a difficult time. I know you've been in lockdown since Friday. It's been on the news a lot. The many cases. I just saw some pictures of people partying in Eilat actually, but I'm not sure those are very recent pictures. But it was just about some girls being abused and stuff. So there's just this report about different countries, and Israel was also mentioned. So anyway, but of course the lockdown is very, very difficult. However, it's also an opportunity again. It's an opportunity, less to do possibly, and an opportunity to bring the Dharma into your own life. So without having to give up what you do right now, but as part of the experiment, is it really working or not? You can only find out. And you don't have to give anything up. I mean, you don't have to call yourself Buddhist. You just be a good Jew, you be a good Christian, a good Muslim, or a good atheist, whatever you want to be. It doesn't matter. Just try it. Just try whether this gives you more satisfaction and more happiness. And it should not be like your job that you don't really like to do, and you look forward when it's the weekend, you don't have to go to work. So it shouldn't be like that. But it also should not be like a hobby that you only do when you feel really good and you just do it every now and then. It should be the underlying thread, if you like, or the underlying force when you do your job, when you do your hobby, whatever you do. If you do it, well, thinking, may I do it for the benefit of all sentient beings? It sounds a little bit bizarre. I mean, whatever you do, if you have a job, I don't know, selling bagels or what else, cleaning the streets or whatever your job is, to think, oh, for the welfare of all sentient beings, but actually you do work for society. I mean, you're giving a service. No matter what you do, even if you just sell socks or I don't know, well, you're giving people a service. Of course, if you're doctors and lawyers and all that, of course, there's a service there. More obviously there is, but whatever you do give something to society. And then with the attitude, this is my practice of giving. This is my practice of working for the welfare of all sentient beings. If your motivation is that, then that's your practice. So your job becomes your practice. And when your hobby, you do your hobby for the welfare of all sentient beings, in the sense that it calms you down, you do something you're joyful, it gives you more energy. So again, you don't just use this for yourself, but for the welfare of all sentient beings. And again, as part of the coming weeks or this week's practice, well, it's still giving. And once I finish this quick summary, I'll add something to it. All right, anyway, so having said what I said just now, the kinds of joy that I found, okay, so just saying give me gives a bodhisattva incredible joy, bodhisattva on that level. And then number 15, well, is there suffering or not when the bodhisattva gives away his body, when the bodhisattvas give away, when you give away your body? Well, it depends on what level you've reached. If you're not in arya yet, yes, there'll be suffering. When you've reached the arya level, there is no suffering. But even if there's suffering, that's good. Why? Because then you get a feeling for what others go through. And that reminded me of what I read on Yom Kippur. I came across this one part where it said why you do what you're doing. Oh yeah, by refraining from these activities, eating and drinking, bathing and washing, etc., the body's uncomfortable but can still survive. And it says something about, I read this before, it shows you what other people go through. It gives you a sense of what other people go through. I don't find it now. Oh yeah, but feeling pain, one can feel how others feel when they are in pain. Wow, how beautiful. So if you want to fast tomorrow, I'm not going to make this a commitment, but if you want to refrain from eating and drinking, well, you do it by feeling pain. You can feel how others feel when they are in pain. That's exactly here. This practice that is described, even if you give away things that may be painful, as in like you still want to give them, but there's a certain degree of discomfort when you give them. All right. It's like when you go jogging, it's really good for you and you do it, but there's still some level of discomfort. So likewise here, when you give, and there's this underlying joy you want to give, but it's still not that easy to do so. So it's not regret as such, but it's like slightly, it's not that easy to do it. So especially if it's, well, giving blood, donating blood, for instance, well, you need to get someone poke a needle into you and you have to go to the place, etc. Or giving your I don't know what else you can give, but all these other things that you can physically give, well, involves a certain degree of discomfort, but then you can meditate also on what other people go through. All right. So here we talk about, of course, bodhisattvas on a certain level, path of accumulation, path of preparation, when you're not yet on that arya level we've been discussing on. If you give away your body, then it's admissible. It's not advisable. It's admissible. It's admissible in that you can do it, of course, but you should use it to understand. So the pain that you experience, only to experience, to understand what others go through. So this is what bodhisattvas do on that level. And once you reach the arya level, then anyway, there's no pain. It's easy to do. And you only do it, of course, if it's greatly beneficial. All right. So I just wanted to summarize, give you the summary. Of course, you probably still remember, but just to bring it all back again, to make sure you really understand. And when you read the text, go back to it, you know what it's talking about. All right, but what I really like to address now, and we'll have more time, of course, in the future, this is true for all the paramitas, so it's nothing unusual. Presenting now verse 16, presenting the divisions of the perfection of generosity. So how can you divide generosity? Of course, in the Lamrim Chemo, there's different ways of just dividing it up. I've already mentioned, for instance, giving of material things, giving of the Dharma, and giving protection, giving other people protection, saving them basically from certain sufferings, giving them fearlessness as it's usually described. But here it's a different type. Here it's divided, and that's something you find in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. You distinguish between what's called mundane giving or worldly giving and super mundane or transworldly giving, if you like. This is just this is a Tibetan word that that's been translated here, Jigten and Jigten Ledeva. Jigten means world. Jigten can mean so many different things. It can mean world, it can mean samsara, it can mean ordinary. It just depends on the context. And that's true in English too. World as in like our world, our human ordinary world. It's very worldly what they're doing. So in that sense, you have that connotation of the word too. And maybe in Hebrew, there's a similar word like worldly and mundane, as in like, again, mundane, worldly, and then super mundane, going beyond the worldly. All right. So here there's this distinction between ordinary, in that sense, ordinary giving, and giving that is here in relation to a certain understanding that is super worldly, or it's beyond that ordinary. What is that? An understanding of emptiness. In that, and so this is what I want you to do for this week. That's what I want you to do. Practice this type of giving, where in the morning when you wake up, this is the best time to go into this. When in the morning when you get up, you reflect upon three aspects. First of all, if you think that whatever you give, you can best do it in the morning, so you're really used to it a little bit, so it's easier to then put it into practice throughout the day. But to think that if today I practice giving, to remind yourself that the object you give, the recipient of the giving, and the giver, yourself, lack inherent existence. Now, this is considered to be extremely important. They talk about the text, they talk about the three spheres, the sphere of emptiness, in that the three are the giver, the recipient, and the object that's given. To understand that on a conventional level, yes, you're engaging out of compassion, out of love, out of the wish to become enlightened, motivated by that, you give to someone. But to also not forget that although the object you give, you yourself, the recipient, appear to be so solid and concrete and existing in and of themselves, they don't exist that way. So in that way, of course, important, not just love, compassion are important as part of our practice, but what is so important too is an understanding of reality. So how do things really exist? And without that, of course, we've already learned, without the understanding of emptiness, without the understanding of selflessness, our aspiration to become a Buddha will just remain an aspiration, and we will not be able to actually reach that goal. So understanding emptiness, of course, is crucial. So that being the case, well, how can we think about these? How can we think of these three lacking inherent existence? Now, take the object you give. Take the object you give. If you give a certain object, well, what do you describe it? The object to give. It's the object to be given. Is that in and of itself? Is that an actual object to be given? Is there something just from the side of that object, just in and of itself? Is there something with this object that makes it an object to be given? Is that intrinsic? Is it part of this object to be that? Of course not. We call it an object to be given in dependence on a recipient and the person who gives. So if you didn't have those two, you wouldn't have an object to be given. So in that sense, when you call it an object to be given, well, does it exist conventionally in a relative sense as an object to be given? Sure. It's in relation to the person who receives it and the person who gives it, and the action of giving. That's a fourth aspect that's usually not mentioned but included here. Even the act of giving couldn't take place without the object to be given, and without the object to be given, without the giving, etc., and the giver and the recipient, you wouldn't have the object to be given. So there's nothing within the object that makes it an object to be given, because it's only in relation to many other things that it is that, so that we call it that. So just to remind yourself, and of course, anything else you can say about this object. If it's a cake, well, is it a cake in and of itself? Now, again, it's only a cake in relation to certain characteristics, being sweet, having a certain color, a certain shape. That's why it's called a cake. It's in and of itself. There's no cakeness. And you can do this exercise forever, whatever you describe it, whatever you refer to. There's nothing from the side of the object that can be found to be this, that, or the other. It's always in relation to many other things, and we just call it that. And that's what we say. That shows that this object is intrinsically, from its own side, X, Y, or Z. That's basically describing the emptiness of this object that is only conventionally or in relation to something else that we call this an object, a cake, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't, but it appears to be, that's how it appears to the mind. It seems that the object is very concrete. It's not just me calling it that. It's really, truly, it is a cake. It's an object to be given, etc. And that's our problem. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama likes to say, that there's this discrepancy, this gap between how things appear and how they actually exist. And the same is true. So the object to be given. What about the person giving? I'm the person giving. I'm the giver, right? I can call myself the giver or the generous one or whatever. So the giver, can you find a giver? Where's the giver within me? Is there some giver that's kind of intrinsic to me, that's within me? No, it's only in relation to a certain action of giving, the object that's given, and the recipient, that I can call myself the giver. There's nothing found that makes me the giver, like as if independently I was this giver. All right, again, the same idea. And of course, if I talk about the giver as an I, or as German, or as a nun, or as a female, whatever, all of those are also just labeled. They only call that, I'm called a woman in relation to certain body parts, including my mind, the way I feel about myself. In relation to that, I can be called a woman. There's no womanness within me, no concrete kind of inborn or intrinsic womanness, inherent womanness as such, etc. So to remind ourselves, and the recipient is the same thing. In and of himself, in and of herself, there's nothing to be found as a recipient, besides the fact they receive this. Of course, they have to accept it too. I have to give, they have to receive. If they reject it, then this act of giving is not complete. All right. So again, to remind ourselves of emptiness, that although things appear to be very concrete and solid, this is good, this is bad, this is big, this is small, no, they don't exist that way. The object I give is only labeled. The person I give to is only labeled. The act of giving is only labeled on moments in time, right? Different, like as part of like a movie, like you have different moments in time, like you have different pictures, picture frames when you play a movie. In the same way, like an action is made of different movements of my hand, the giving. And based on these movements that are happening in succession in time, I label giving. And then there's this person. Because of this, I labeled giver, and etc. So it's to remind ourselves that these three, this act of giving, when we engage in that, it lacks inherent existence. All right. So this should be, again, part of your daily life, where you bring this into your daily life. Of course, you can't remember it all the time, but I also don't want to make your homework just once a day, because like, what's once a day? That's nothing. Most things you do throughout a day, you do at least more than once. So to make it a habit, to bring this into you, to start living the Dharma without having to change much of your life, except that you bring this into your daily life. So doing that is to remind yourself again and again, generosity in that case, compassion, and of course emptiness. So those are the three: compassion, connected with bodhicitta, giving, the mental state of wanting to give. That's what we're interested in. Whether you then give or not, no, but mainly I want to give. And if there's the opportunity, great, you act on that. If there's no opportunity, well, at least you've practiced the giving mentally. And to remind yourself, it doesn't exist the way it appears. And no matter how your understanding of emptiness is, I mean, you may not understand it at all or understand a little bit. Well, as the lamas usually tell us, to just remind yourself, it doesn't exist the way it appears. It's like an illusion. It's like an optical illusion where things appear to be of a certain color, but that's not their actual color. When things appear to be moving, but they're not moving. All these different appearances, they don't exist the way they appear. Well, likewise here, on an even deeper level, things appear to be truly this, that, and the other, independently this, that, and the other, X, Y, and Z, but they don't exist that way. If you just remind yourself without really understanding, you're already making a change. Your mind, the mind that holds on to the solidity, will already be shaken. All right. So that's basically what this verse is talking about. So verse number, number 16. So this presents the division of the perfection of generosity when it says generosity devoid of the gift, receiver, and giver is called a supermundane perfection. So generosity, where you remind yourself that it's not in and of itself, it's not from the side of the object, it's not independently. There's no independent gift, there's no independent receiver or recipient, there's no independent giver, and there's no independent giving, to include that as well. If you remind yourself at the same time while you're giving, right? If you just kind of, and that's why I say, if you do it in the morning and you kind of have that still as a memory in the back of your mind, and then engage in the act of giving, well, that becomes super mundane. That's super mundane, as in like it's extraordinary giving. It's part of the perfection. Of course, if you conjoin it with bodhicitta, if you have actual bodhicitta, then you have an actual perfection of generosity, and not just an ordinary one, but the super mundane one. But when attachment for these three arises, so attachment here means if you hold on to them existing inherently, oh, this is an inherent gift, an inherent receiver, I'm the inherent giver. So if you kind of, how do you notice if you feel like the other person, they're just receiving things all the time and feeling a little bit like looking down on them? And if you feel a sense of arrogance, and at the same time that gift seems to be in and of itself beautiful, you're not practicing the super mundane perfection. Okay, but you can easily switch that. Remind yourself, oh no, wait a minute, yes, this is how it appears, it's due to my habits that I perceive it that way, but it exists actually as lacking those aspects. There's nothing to be found that makes it an object, that makes it an object to be given, that makes it a gift. The gift is dependent on the giver, the receiver, on the act of giving, etc. And so this is true for the receiver and the giver. Now, of course, if you give, we've already heard, if you give without compassion, it's still generosity. We've heard, even if you're weak in compassion, you're still giving. Great. It's still good. It still benefits you. And it benefits others as well. But if you can do more than that, give with great compassion, well, of course, you benefit yourself so much more. And of course, you benefit others. Indirectly, it's inspiring if they get a sense of how you give, it's a good example, etc. But then if you can go even further to give with the understanding of emptiness, well, that's the best. And again, whichever kind of understanding you do have, however limited it is, but it's better to apply that without having any at all. So to remind yourself, yeah, it appears to exist as the solid gift, but it's not. So can you do that while you give? I think you can, even if you've got just a few seconds to maybe walk up to a beggar and give food to the beggar, like the person begging at the side of the road, or if you give to charity, or like I said, I suggested as a part of this week's practice to go through your stuff, to maybe, if you find the time, go through your stuff and take a few things that others may benefit from and give them away. Right, as part of your practice. But then when you give it away, remind yourself, just for a few seconds, don't exist inherently. All right. So that would be the super mundane practice of giving. Great. Now, there's a little bit of explanation given here as to the word perfection. Doesn't relate to giving itself. It talks about why do we speak of the perfection of generosity? What is that? This is a word that's used in Sanskrit as well as Tibetan, and you're familiar with this, like the word perfection of one thing or another, generosity, ethical conduct, patience, and so forth. You're familiar with that word, and how is it used? What does it mean? Well, first of all, the meaning is quite simple. When you engage in giving that is influenced by bodhicitta, then it's called the perfection of giving. So if it's influenced by the wish to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings, if that's your underlying motivation, that is, let's say you've generated bodhicitta, you really generated, you haven't lost it, it's there with you for a few days, and that's your driving force from now on. And if then you give, then that's automatically conjoined. The act of giving is automatically conjoined with this wish to benefit all sentient beings, with your wish to become enlightened for the welfare of sentient beings, because this colors all your actions from now on. Right now, what colors our actions is the wish to be happy myself. That's what we do. Whatever we do, it's always done with that in the back of our mind, most of the things. So most of the things we do are done with the underlying current, if you like, the underlying kind of motivation, may I find happiness. Now that is replaced. That's still there, but you try to replace it now with the wish to become enlightened. You make that, and it takes time. That's not easy. That's the hardest part, to really familiarize yourself with it. That's the hardest part, but that's why I keep asking you to do it. This just, if you do it 20 times a day, you're forming a habit there. And if you can enhance that and do it even more often, incredible. That's the only way to generate bodhicitta, doing it again and again and again, forming a habit. Like you can become an alcoholic. How do you become an alcoholic? You form a habit. You drink one day, you drink the next day, you drink twice the third day, you drink 5 times a day, you drink every letter, etc. It becomes a habit. Unfortunately, alcoholism becomes faster a habit than, than becoming a bodhisattva. But still, it's just a matter of, it's the same functioning of the mind. It's the same mechanics of the mind. And this is why one of the most profound things Shantideva has said was when he said, there's nothing that doesn't become easier through familiarity. Nothing. Alcoholism becomes easier. Jogging becomes easier. Whatever it is, everything becomes easier through familiarity. And that is true for bodhicitta, for anything. It's just how the mind works. And this is the big experiment here with studying this text, to get you into that habit, okay? And like any habit, you just need to keep developing it. But it's not just the wish to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. Even if you just recite it in your mind, even if you don't feel it, you will feel it a little bit. So just repeat it in your mind until a feeling arises. And then hopefully you have that feeling 20 times at least. But of course, also together with giving. The mind that opens itself to others in that it just wishes to give money, things, time, whatever. All right. The Dharma. Okay. The Dharma as in like wishing to practice. That's a type of generosity. And this will come later at some point when we talk about how all the other perfections, all the other practices are always in some way or another present in your practice of one of them. So in the practice of generosity, I just described it. It's a perfection of generosity when it's combined with bodhicitta. Okay. But then there's also the other perfections are present in there, should be present in there. But I'll explain that once we've gone through them, because otherwise I have to explain them first. So we'll go through them, the next 5 chapters. They're not very long. We go through them, and wisdom is, of course, the longest chapter. So we'll definitely talk about the 6, and then later even 4 more are mentioned. Okay. So having said that, now what the text describes, and it's not extremely interesting, but you may still want to hear just where does the word perfection come from? It's actually, perfection is a very loose translation of what it actually means. Here, the type of generosity described here is a generosity that goes beyond the ordinary. It goes to the other shore. This is the meaning that you have in Sanskrit and in Tibetan, like going beyond the ordinary. In Tibetan, it literally means having gone to the other side. So it's generosity that's extraordinary, having gone beyond the ordinary. The other side here means having moved beyond the samsaric type, ordinary type. So that's just the meaning of the word. But it should actually not just mean the one that has gone to the other side, because that would be a Buddha's generosity, but it should also refer to the one where you go to the other side. So in Sanskrit, that's easier, because here it's explained, Lama Tsongkhapa says it can be used with a certain grammatical case, the accusative. If you use that, I think it's how it's pronounced, accusative, I'm not sure. But anyway, with that, it's like the one you've gone beyond. And if it's instrumental, then it's like where you go to that. Anyway, the point is here that this type of generosity in connection with bodhicitta, that's called the paramita of generosity, it kind of has this meaning of going beyond or having gone beyond. Okay, and perfection is just the word that's been chosen, which actually seems to imply the one you've already reached, the best kind of generosity, like the one of a Buddha, where there's just nothing in the way to you being generous. And that's where the word perfection comes from. Anyway, it explains this here, where the Sanskrit word, etc., comes from. I thought it was interesting, but it's more interesting if you're interested in how words and languages work. All right. Okay. So, therefore, Lama Tsongkhapa cites, of course, the guide to the Bodhisattva way of life. Very beautiful, inspiring verses when it comes to practicing generosity. Shantideva says, my body and my material resources and roots of virtue of all three times, past, present, and future. So all the virtue, all the good karma accumulated of the three times, I shall give these away with no reserve to fulfill the wishes of all beings. By giving away everything, one transcends sorrow and goes beyond sorrow. My mind seeks this transcendence of sorrow. Since everything must be given up anyway, to give these to sentient beings is most excellent. So he also mentions, of course, to practice giving away now, especially material things to a certain degree. Well, you have to give it at the time of death anyway. So to also bring in a reminder of our own death. We're not going to be around forever. And however much we love our flat, our house, our car, our body, everything we possess, none of those we can take with us. None of them. So might as well give them away now. And certain things, of course, you can't give away. Your virtues you can't give away, but you can visualize you give them away. And it's just part of this. And this is the most precious thing, because this is the one thing you take with you. Your mind you take with you, and you cannot separate your mind from what was left of the actions throughout this life. So positive actions left residues, negative ones left residues. So the positive ones, those are the ones that create the causes for happy events in the future, for joyful experiences in the future. So these are very precious. That's the only thing we can take with us, not the money we made. But if we cheated others, that comes with us. That cheating others, the residue of that remains in our mind. And then, of course, on the other scale, or on the other, in comparison to that, of course, what we give to others, giving to others, the objects that we give, of course, we can't take that with us, or the other person, or whatever, but the virtue of doing so. And that's why it's so important, before we die, at least visualize you give everything away, or you just use it for the benefit of other sentient beings, but it's actually given to others. Okay. And then comes verse 17. That's the conclusion of this chapter. So these you'll see at the end of those following chapters. So it was like a conclusion. And you may have noticed the text is very poetic. A lot of analogies are used to describe, in verse 2, for instance, great compassion is described to a sea, to water, the harvest, and so forth. Moon is a huge part. And so here again, it's very poetic, verse 17, when it says, abiding perfectly in the bodhisattva's mind and endowed with light, beautifying the sublime ones. This ground of perfect joy is the water crystal gem, the moon, which dispels all darkness and reigns victorious. All right, so in Tibetan it sounds just as poetic as it sounds in English. So it just says, these are special qualities. It talks about 3 special qualities that generosity has in the mind of a bodhisattva. So this open mind that just wants to give. First of all, it says it's like just as the moon. It actually compares generosity to the moon. Water crystal gem is just another word for the moon. So the moon is compared to a water crystal gem, and therefore sometimes called the water crystal gem. So just as the moon resides high in the sky, so does this generosity reside in the mind of the bodhisattva, high up there. It's high as in like precious, as a precious quality in the bodhisattva's mind. And just as the moon beautifies the landscape, think of like a beautiful full moon night where everything is touched by this kind of whitish light, and it looks very beautiful, the shadows, etc. So in the same way, this quality beautifies the mind of the bodhisattva. And a third quality, it dispels, like the moon dispels all the darkness. What does generosity do? Well, it's instrumental in the removal of the darkness of ignorance, the darkness of our misapprehension of reality. Well, in what sense? It's just as simple as that. If you give away, give to others your focus is on others. Your focus is on other sentient beings. So this grasping onto an I, which comes from a misapprehension anyway, your action of giving, you move away from this misapprehension. And the more you move away by engaging in actions of giving, by engaging in actions of love and compassion, where your focus is on others, your mind is moving away from the object I, making it easier to realize the I wasn't there in the first place. Does that make sense? So it supports it. That's why, oops, sorry, I was a little loud. That's why, there are 4 messages I'm going to see. That's why, about 2 minds concept you refer to what Sanskrit meaning giving. All right. So that's why it's actually in the text, when we practice love and compassion and generosity and patience, they're actually fake. Fake in that when we practice them with the misapprehension of reality, I think it was Geshe Damdra who once used this example, Gila told me, that's like I don't know whether he said it that way, but dancing a ballet in a what do you call it, like an astronaut suit. I don't know whether you've ever won one. I've never won one. But the suits that an astronaut wears, or maybe like a deep sea diver, you know, like when in the past, especially, they had these very kind of unwieldy kind of suits that they wore. It was very stiff and they could hardly move. And I guess also like in the old days, the astronauts, you know, they looked very unwieldy, not very flexible. So if we have this kind of suit and you try to dance a ballet, it'll look ridiculous. So this is our practice. This is our practice of generosity. It doesn't come naturally. It's just, it requires effort. It's awkward. It's, well, why? Because there's something in the way. Just as the suit is in the way to the person trying to dance a ballet, it's our holding onto an I, an intrinsic I, in an intrinsic existence of other things that's in the way to truly practice love and compassion. So once we realize emptiness directly, they happen naturally. They start to flow. They start to be, they just really unfold their full potential. But why do we practice it before we come to realize emptiness? Because in order to realize emptiness, to move away from this grasping, to actually understand there was never a self, we need to do this. So this is a cause. It's a cause, but it's also eventually a result, in the sense that initially helps us to generate wisdom. We need this because otherwise our grasping is too strong. So we're already moving away from this grasping. But then once we've actually totally moved away from this grasping because we understood how the self actually exists, then we have a type of love and compassion that cannot be compared to the one we have right now. This is like taking off the suit and dancing the ballet very gracefully. All right. Okay. Oops, now I see all these messages I haven't seen before. Some in Hebrew. Can't hear, says Narit. Also not seeing.
It's from
that was resolved. Something about the passcode. Someone says no. Could you give more explanation about two-mind concept you refer to? Please repeat the word Sanskrit meaning. Okay, so just the two minds. I hope that was, I'm not sure which two minds the past is referring to. But I guess it's the...
Yes.
Yes?
You keep using the term two minds, and I never heard this before, so I wanted more explanation.
Oh, more explanation. You want more explanation? Well, I go over it again next time anyway, and it'll become part of the next chapters too. But it's like saying it's giving. You have two minds here, which is the giving itself, giving of objects on one hand, but at the same time also understanding the lack of intrinsic existence of everything that is involved in giving. That is the giver, the recipient, the gift, and even the act of giving, understanding that they don't exist inherently. So those two minds, you try and make them arise well, if not simultaneously, but go quickly back and forth. Okay, remind yourself they don't exist in that way, but at the same time, the wish to give motivated by bodhicitta. Those would be the two minds. Or in another way, well, two minds, if you mean to, well, you have the act of giving, you can also divide giving from the point of view of this explanation I just gave. You have giving where you engage in what I just described, where you do bring it together with your understanding of emptiness, and you have giving where you don't do that. That would be the other type of giving, right? If you refer to the two minds, then it's giving with an understanding of emptiness and without it. Okay. In one case, you remind yourself that things don't exist the way they appear while you practice giving, and in the other case, you don't do that. So the fast case, of course, is better because your giving becomes also another cause to remind you, or to another cause for understanding emptiness. Not just are you moving away from this grasping at the I, but throughout the act of giving, you leave residues in the mind, you leave imprints in the mind, form a habit to see things as conventionally giving, giver, etc., but being actually on an ultimate level free from intrinsic existence. Okay. And then the Sanskrit word paramita, well, Sanskrit word is paramita. If you read Lama Tsongkhapa, we don't have the time to explain para means this, mita is this, grammatically, where does the M come in, the su comes in. I don't understand all this myself because I haven't learned Sanskrit. I'm more familiar with the Tibetan. And so it's just saying the word paramita, like para going beyond, mita going. I think this is how they explained it. So it's like going beyond or having gone beyond. This is what the Sanskrit word denotes, paramita. And it gives like an explanation, the accusative should be mentioned, etc. But that's just Sanskrit rules. And unless you've learned Sanskrit, I think it's a little hard to understand that. But paramita is the Sanskrit. All right. So if you have further questions, that work quite well with Vada, sending a message to Shir. You're of course always welcome to ask. And sometimes people ask me personally, that's perfectly fine. And I may choose to just answer the question in class. Yeah, so for everyone to hear the answer. All right, so let's do some meditation. You may already guess that we're going to do meditation on the super mundane practice of giving. Okay, but also, of course, for this week, especially tomorrow with Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, of course, making up our relationship with others, which further helps us to generate great compassion. But of course, also to give, to continue with the practice of giving for this coming week until we move to the next paramita and the week after. And you can do so mentally. I described many different ways to do it. You can do so physically, whichever suits you best, but this should be your main focus. Bodhicitta, giving, and understanding of the lack of inherent existence of the object, etc. All right, so let's do this together, especially this last part where you remind yourself that what you give doesn't exist inherently, etc. We'll start with a few moments of just breathing. And now visualize you find yourself in town and you come across a person begging for money. looking very tired, very hungry. Full of worry, sincerely needing your help. So first, generate compassion for this person, but also make it a point to generate compassion for all sentient beings. May this person and all other living beings be free from all their sufferings, all their limitations. Feel this really from the depth of your heart while you're looking at this person begging. And then generate bodhicitta. May I become enlightened. May I myself reach the enlightened state of a Buddha. For the welfare of this beggar, but also for the welfare of all other sentient beings. And now, generate the wish to give. To give 10 shekel. Or $2, $5 to this person in need. By thinking through this act of giving this person this money, may one day I'll be able to lead this person and all other sentient beings to the enlightenment of a Buddha. But then also remind yourself of the actual nature of the gift, the money, the recipient, yourself as the giver, and included in those the act of giving. So the gift itself does not intrinsically exist as a gift. But it's merely labeled in relation to you giving, the recipient receiving, and so forth. And then think of the person begging. There's nothing intrinsic in this person that makes them a beggar. There's no inherent beggar, but only a conventional, labeled beggar, in that we call someone a beggar based on a certain action. And as the recipient of the money I give them, that's just labeled. There's no intrinsic recipient, but only a conventional one, in dependence on the gift, the act of giving, and the person giving. In the same way, I'm not an inherent giver. Which could lead to the arrogance, thinking I'm so generous. Since being the one who gives, the giver, is also merely labeled. In dependence on the gift, the recipient, and the action of handing over that gift. So to conclude, remind yourself again, I want to give this for the welfare of this person and for the welfare of all sentient beings. at the same time, the giver, the gift, and the recipients exist only conventionally. And with this, you've just engaged in the supermundane perfection of generosity. And now let's dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated by learning and thinking about this text, and finally meditating on particularly the verses on generosity. May none of this virtue be destroyed by anger and hatred, but may it become one of the causes of eliminating all the obstructions on our mind and of actualizing the fully enlightened state of the Buddha for the welfare of each and every sentient being. And with this in mind, let's recite the dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the hopeless find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all the medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, great. All right. Okay, I think I forgot to explain one verse. I just realized as I was reading this. Never mind, I'll mention it as part of the repetition, part of the review. I forgot one verse, but yes, as I said, I'll do it next week. So please don't forget the homework. Please don't forget to practice what we discussed here. And read the text in advance. I meant to say that before, but I forgot. So please, the next chapter, we start with the second chapter next time. And if you read a little bit in advance, it helps you to understand. And any questions, you're welcome. Oh, okay. There are some more things I hadn't read by Angchuk. Start of interviews. I'm very helpful to viewers knowing Tibetan here and later on YouTube. Okay, Tibetan text. The Tibetan text, the whole, just the verses in the beginning. I'm not sure I can cite the Tibetan text, because if I do many of them, start or end of each stanza. Okay, I'll think about that. Otherwise, I could maybe make it available in Tibetan. We could just post it as well. So that would be a possibility. Anyway, so if you have any questions, you can always send them to Shir. That's okay, Shir. Yeah. Okay, great. So have a great week.
Thank you.
Happy Yom Kippur. Sorry for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
מתי השיעור פעם הבאה? לא הבנתי.
Sure.
ראשון?
שיעור הבא ביום ראשון עוד שבוע ויום, ואני אשלח גם את סיסמה בקבוצה, וגם יש באתר.
תודה רבה.
תודה.